Hello and welcome to our 18th Thrive webinar on how we can decarbonize industrialization and manufacturing. We are here with three amazing panelists, Rebecca, Andres, and Pierre. And it's really exciting, this topic. I know this is a topic that's quite important, and many governments are, pushing, governments and businesses are pushing to get this done. So hopefully we have a sustainable future. So again, I appreciate all of you for joining this discussion. For the members watching, just remember, if you want your rewards points at the end in the comments, you can add what you learned or what you found interesting to get those reward points. And also, if we have time, we'll also answer any questions at the end. So feel free to add those in the comments. Without further ado, let's do introductions. So why don't we go around? Maybe Rebecca, you want to start? Just share a little bit about yourself and what your business and your role is.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mario. I'm Rebecca. I'm the program manager for the Regional Sustainability Initiative, which is a program offered through Sustainable Waterloo Region. So I work with businesses across Waterloo Region and also now a little bit beyond too. And I help them integrate sustainability into their business practices. I support with the measurement of their impacts, develop baselines, and provide our members with target scenarios so that they can choose the most realistic and ambitious targets for their organizations. I also help with employee engagement, supporting green team building and their initiatives. I foster connections and collaborations with other businesses amongst our memberships too. And I support the movements forward on establishing sustainability as a core piece of our member business practices.
Great, Andres, you can feel free to go.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Andres Friedman. I'm a co-founder and CEO of a startup called Salty. Our startup basically is working to facilitate and accelerate summary, what we've created is a platform-based business model and app that facilitates the customer journey and makes it easy to quote and install solar panels on the house or in a business as it is to take an Uber. So that's the concept, and obviously there's a whole logistics model behind it as well, but in summary, that's a digital and easy solution to facilitate the
Great. So I think there were some audio issues some of didn't hear. So just make sure for questions going forward, maybe change your audio settings. With that in mind, let's go over to Pierre.
Good evening, everyone. I'm with Tug Lake Energy. This is a company dedicated to diversifying the energy mix for remote industries and communities, predominantly in the high north in Canada. So we've got deployment at the Glencore Raglan mine as well as other sites. The device you see behind me is from Saxe Harbor, which is the northwesternmost community in Canada in Nunavut. And this is a package that we deployed to power a wind measurement tower over in the Arctic. And Tug Lake is also involved with other deployments, notably in the Caribbean, on islands, and in Africa, essentially to remove dependency on diesel and fossil fuels.
Great. Yeah, thanks everyone for sharing the introductions and sharing about yourself. In case you didn't hear what Andres did, in the descriptions in the comments, you'll see his LinkedIn so you can learn more about him and Solfine. With that in mind, let's go to our next question. So this question is from Mitchell, based in the US, and he was wondering, he's especially for his work, he's actually doing this at the moment. So he's wondering, how can companies track their GHG emissions, especially those in Scope 3? And whoever goes first, feel free to explain a bit more of what Scope 3 in case the viewers don't know. So maybe Pierre, do you want to go first?
Certainly. Essentially, the Scope 1, 2, and 3 reflect what's upstream and downstream from what a company does. The Scope 2 typically would be what they actually do and the pollution they create in doing what they're doing. Scope 1 would be the upstream inputs into their process, and Scope 3 would be essentially their customers or the downstream emissions from what they're doing. This is highly dependent on each industry. In our field, essentially, the diesel emissions can be tracked fairly easily. You can have a number of liters of diesel consumed for a given kilowatt hour of output from a diesel genset. And you can also have a ratio applied to the number of liters that you consume. So a liter of diesel would generate about the 2.8 kilogram of CO2 per liter of diesel. So you just do a simple math and you can essentially assess the CO2 emissions or the greenhouse gas emissions from, let's say, the generation of electricity using diesel gensets. And if you essentially inject renewable energy on a microgrid that is diesel powered, you can just say every kilowatt hour of wind energy on the diesel grid is displacing an equivalent amount of liters. And typically a gen set would have a 3.81 kilowatt hour per liter of diesel generated, so consumed. So you can do the math there and calculate the GHG reduction you do by injecting renewable energy on a diesel microgrid. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question properly, but that's one way to do it, I would say.
Yeah, sure. It's just based on your experience. So, Rebecca, you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our program, specifically, companies do this by collecting data on their key activities throughout the year. So many of our businesses, they'll work to collect data on their operations, more specifically on stationary gas and electricity consumption in their facilities. So usually that's natural gas. And then if a company also owns fleet vehicles, they also include those in their Scope 1 considerations. And many members do this through either kilometers traveled or through purchased gas and diesel. And for Scope 3 considerations, it's important that our members identify the key pieces of their operations. Many of our members will include employee commuting, business travel, waste, and water consumption as part of their Scope 3 impacts. And increasingly, folks are interested in identifying emissions for their supply chains. Overall, I think it's important to understand all the impacts of your business while also being mindful of the risks in double counting your emissions in Scope 3 too, as oftentimes those Scope 3 emissions are quantified by other organizations who are measuring their own impacts too. So following standards like the SBT they offer a great methodology for collecting Scope 3 emissions. So there's lots of great tools and resources available to quantify Scope 3, depending on the industry you're focusing on.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, much better.
That's good. Good reinforcement. Yeah. So to add a bit to what Pierre and Rebecca were saying, I mean, the Scope 3 are probably the harder ones to measure and quantify, just because they're much broader and they go throughout the whole supply chain, which in some industries can be obviously very, very complex. There's a couple of recent news that I think are relevant and sort of illustrate the complexity and the importance of this. Microsoft was a few weeks ago announcing sort of their roadmap, their sustainability roadmap, and their plans for net zero. And they were, I guess, espousing that 75% of their emissions are Scope 3, and that's the harder one for them to tackle, because they are very broad, very coming from a wide range of suppliers, where you usually have less influence than in your direct one and so that's part of the challenge and the opportunity. And then along those lines, yesterday, the Boston Consulting Group, the second largest consulting firm in the world, or strategy consulting firm in the world, to be precise, together with SAP, the largest ERP provider in the world, we're announcing a partnership specifically to help companies in their sustainability journey to tackle emission reduction. And specifically the combination of the two, sort of a consulting, a strategy firm that looks at sort of the broader international trade issues, especially as we talk about, for example, Europe starting to impose or talk about, a carbon tax if you're importing products from jurisdictions that have less emissions, stringent standards. With an SAP company, which what they do for a living is basically help companies manage their supply chain. The sort of combination of the two is to bring the tools and the accounting combined with the strategy to really tackle and reduce scope 3 emissions. So I'd say that's it seems to be the biggest challenge, and obviously there's a lot of we're just seeing the beginning, I guess, of companies and tools, I guess, that are being set up to really manage that transition, because we all seem to be going in that direction. Companies are, which is a good thing.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's always nice to hear some different perspectives, different ideas and solutions. For the next question, this is from Fani, based in India, and he's wondering what are the most common options, or some of the most common options for decarbonization across different industries. And I guess I'll give this to Rebecca first, because I know you work with quite a few different businesses.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you. So the first step, I think, really is to measure impacts and really assess where those areas of reduction are. Where can you actually reduce your energy consumption? Where can you reduce high emitting forms of travel? Anything like that. So understanding that baseline is really the key first step in decarbonization for all of our members. So across all industries, this has been our key first step. And then from there, it's exploring what the next feasible option is, whether that's renewable energy opportunities, transitioning their fleets to EVs. We're discussing a lot of that because there's a lot of funding coming down from the federal government right now to transition fleets to EVs. A lot of our members are also looking into performing life cycle assessments on the products that they're purchasing to ensure the lowest impacts possible. And we really need industry to get started on things, measuring their footprints, developing plans for action to reduce those as quickly as possible. And not just by purchasing offsets, but putting in actual meaningful efforts to reduce the impacts in the first place. Once they have reduced their personal impacts, then exploring high quality offsets is always an option that we bring forward to our members as well.
Great. Andres, you want to continue on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously as wide a range of options and mechanisms as industries there are. What we've found, and obviously being a company that focuses on solar energy, that's really sort of my main message. Everyone is like, we should all go solar. Obviously, we are bringing solar panels to countries that have much more sun than in Canada. So it's a no-brainer in Mexico and many other Latin American countries, because it is the cheapest source of energy. It's not obviously the case in Canada and other places. But all that to say, as Rebecca was saying, I think Scope 1 is really where a lot of the focus is from companies, and it's really about looking at their internal production processes and how they can switch to methodologies or technologies that are less carbon intensive. The good news is that usually once there is a change, that change is permanent. It requires big investments. I think that the drive is there to go in that direction. The pressure from customers, from investors, from future regulatory threats as I was talking or mentioning sort of the European example, is driving that. So I do think it is sort of a permanent change, even if it's incremental. When those changes happen, they tend to be more permanent. In the second case, again, that may be more where renewables apply, because scope two emissions do come mainly from the indirect emissions from the electricity consumption of a company. So obviously, the more the company is working with renewables, the bigger the reduction in scope two emissions. And as we were saying earlier, scope three, there's a lot to do. The way we are helping companies, and apologies again for the advertisement, but the way we are helping with companies on scope three emissions is by actually bringing a program where they can help their suppliers adopt solar energy as well, and even their employees at home. That's probably one of the most innovative things that I think we're doing. And as more and more companies, I mean, Rebecca was talking earlier about the commute of employees and business travel of employees as part of scope three. But the more there is a wider adoption of hybrid or work from home, many companies are partially compensating and reporting the sort of electricity that employees use at home, because they're in their laptops all day, right? Like we are all right now, or most of us. And so those emissions are starting to count. At least many companies are reporting that. So helping employees adopt solar at home is a way to reduce those scope three emissions as well, and that's something that we're doing with many companies. So that's those I think are the main issues. And again, then looking at alternative sources of supply is obviously another big initiative. And again, the regulatory encouragement, if we will, is playing a key role, I think, or a future threat of Andor, I would say.
Awesome. Pierre, you want to add to that? I think you're muted.
Sorry. In a different context, we deal with remote communities and remote mines that are not connected to the grid typically. So they have three energy services. One is for electricity generation. The other one is for the generation of heat. And the third one is the generation of transportation or mobility. And typically a large mine in Canada in a remote situation would have a 55% consumption of diesel dedicated to electricity generation, and a 25% consumption of diesel related to transportation or to the actual trucks, so to speak. And then the 20% remaining is for heat generation. So typically, your options for decarbonizing the operations of a mine or a remote community would be to start with the low-hanging fruit, which is the generation of electricity. And typically in the Arctic, the wind is your preferred source, because many months of the year you don't even have sunshine, for 22 hours of the day. Plus, the Arctic is blessed with outstanding wind resources. The wind blows constantly, and it's also an average temperature of -16, which means you have a denser molecule or denser source of wind, which is an added bonus to the wind energy. So once you decarbonize the electricity, tackling the electrification of transport is perhaps the second most evident step. And the third one, generating heat, is not easy necessarily, because chemical fuels have some advantages sometimes that are hard to replace, electrically speaking, especially for industrial processes requiring an 800 degrees C temperature to occur, or let's say to be done. So I guess the options are multiple. It's a matter of selecting or sequencing them to get some early wins, and getting addicted to reducing the carbon as quickly as possible.
Yeah, for sure. I think from all the different ideas or suggestions that were mentioned, it sounds definitely like it depends on your location and the industry on what solution makes the most sense, because Mexico versus the Arctic are quite different. So obviously the solution is going to be different. With that in mind, let's go to the next question. So we have this question from Keegan, who's based in Hong Kong, and he is actually working on this for his company. So he was curious about how can businesses focus, what should a business focus on when decarbonizing their supply chain, and how can they ensure it remains sustainable in the long term? So I think, Andres, you mentioned supply chain a bit earlier on already, so I'll pass this on to you.
Great. I mean, beyond what I said earlier, I think I'll share a couple of, sort of anecdotes that can illustrate a bit how this works. One is we have a customer of us that is a supplier of a major German automotive company. I obviously can't share names, but their customer in Germany basically gave them a very black and white directive that if they don't have renewable energy as part of their energy mix before the end of the year, they're out of their supply chain. Wow. Basically, will no longer be a supplier of this company as of 2023. So it's happening, and it's I mean it's you could say it's quite radical, but obviously they are under a lot of focus and pressure to reduce their scope 3 emissions, and this is what they're doing. So I guess you could say automatically that changes like that are sustainable in the sense that the moment a supplier switches to renewable energy, or a company does, they won't revert back to their old source of electricity necessarily. I think everything else that we mentioned earlier is equally applicable when companies look for alternative suppliers that have or alternative technologies to reduce those carbon emissions. Those tend to be sustainable. So as much as hard work as it is to move in this direction, those changes tend to be permanent. I will mention one last thing, which is yesterday as well. I believe this seems to be a week of lots of news. Yesterday, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the U.S., unveiled a proposal for U.S. listed companies to disclose their environmental sustainability plans, net zero plans, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions reporting, and it's very comprehensive, and plans to reduce them, and metrics and intermediate targets, et cetera, very comprehensive, quite new from the U.S. for the U.S. I mean, I think we would have expected this to happen at some point, but it was quite broad and comprehensive. So again, the industry is moving in that direction, and I think what this proposal shows as well is that a company cannot just make, again, a publicly listed company. A private company can almost do what they want, but a publicly listed company cannot say, "Hey, we have this great strategy, and we're green, and look at our logo, and there's a lot of green and a lot of nice pictures in our logos and in our annual reports." The moment they disclose that they do have plans or targets, they actually need to show the details behind it. So again, the targets, the metrics, and how they're going to get there. So it's sort of raising the game or imposing, certain standards that companies will need to follow. So I think it's a great initiative. This is as early as 2023 and 2024 that companies need to comply. So there's going to be a lot of discussion around how companies do this, and so I think that's what's happening, which is really, really great in my opinion.
Pierre, I think you also mentioned a little bit about supply chain, so with your clients, so maybe you can continue on that.
Sure. I think there's a different set of statistics or metrics companies can use. One metrics that I find particularly interesting is what we would call the energy payback, which is the amount of energy that goes into making something versus the amount of energy produced by that device, whether it's wind or solar or biomass or any such sources of energy you can use. In terms of the wind, the last figure I remember was 8 months. Essentially, if you look at the amount of energy that goes into making a wind turbine and the amount of energy released by the wind turbine, essentially you have a payback of about 8 months to essentially make you energy neutral. This is one of the things where maybe solar was challenged at least a few years back when the energy payback was more of the order of 20 years or so. Now it's probably more efficient nowadays, and maybe Andres can update us on the numbers. But in a situation like this, a country like India, for instance, who would wish to solarize their whole economy, essentially would need to spend a lot of energy to do that if they were to make their own solar panels. So that's why you had Suzlon and sizable wind energy companies that came out of India, because initially they selected wind, even though they have a substandard wind resource compared to other countries, they selected wind as a national target. So this is one metrics to follow, but I think the carbon intensity of producing iron ore, producing aluminum, producing any minerals that we release out of Canada is going to be increasingly important, because in let's say in iron ore, Sweden and Finland already moved to carbon pricing well above $100 a ton for a number of years, and as a result, they decarbonized their production of steel. And in premium markets such as in Europe or California and so on, you'll be able to justify a premium price if you have a greener steel or greener aluminum that you sell. So I think in Canada we need to start tracking that, or the decarbonizing of our production of minerals and raw materials, so to be competitive in the markets of the future.
Okay, yeah. So I would say start by understanding the supply chain context and the impacts that you have associated with that. Really try and get a general understanding of the emissions associated with what you're purchasing or consuming. A lot of our members are doing life cycle assessments on the products that they are purchasing and installing at their facilities too. Since a major focus of our organization is focusing on operational impacts. So a lot of our members are now implementing plans for future upgrades that they'll have to make, and making sure that those installations have the lowest impact on the environment and also their community long term. Another thing I would recommend is following a science-based target methodology. I mentioned that earlier. It really offers a good understanding of ways to approach your Scope 3 emissions throughout your supply chain. And it helps you to set the intentions too, so that you're approaching your supply chain in a more holistic approach. And I mean, everybody's mentioned this. You have to engage with the right people, talk to the suppliers, let them know that these are your needs and requirements. Sustainability is an important thing for more than just, the enterprise itself. It's important for all stakeholders now too. So this can create a lot of mutual benefits as well. So just talk to those that are supplying for you, and make sure they know that sustainability is a key part of your business.
Yeah, once again, many great suggestions, so appreciate that. With our final question, unless there's any from the audience, so if anyone, viewers are watching, have any follow-up questions, feel free. We'll take maybe one or two. But with that in mind, we'll go to the last question. So this one is from Prince in Malawi, and he's wondering, this is quite a big question, so I hope you can answer him. So his question is, what are the chances that we'll achieve zero GHG emissions by 2030? And I'm thinking he means globally, but maybe you can also share from your country's perspective. Pierre, why don't you go first?
I personally think 2030 is going to be challenging, if only because of the supply restrictions, let's say in mobility, or buying industrial vehicles or cars and so on. It's just essentially a supply and demand catch-up situation, perhaps, which will be a bit later, but that might be an issue for some jurisdictions, such as my home province of Quebec. We typically have a grid that is already 98 or 99% green, but the electrification of transport has to wait for, let's say, industrial vehicles becoming available, because half of the emissions are with industrial larger size vehicles, but they're not commonly available as of yet. So to me, 2030 is really challenging, even with the best policies and the best will. Realistically, I think it's more 2035, maybe 2040. But if we talk about 2050, In my opinion, the carbon capture, direct air carbon capture, is essential, as well as natural carbon air capture, CO2 capture, because there's maybe, even if we were to double the abatement of CO2 every year until 2040, we'll still be about 10 gigatons short of what we need to do to get to the negative 1.5. So we need to supplement this with sucking out, so to speak, the CO2 out of the air, as well as planting more trees and doing things to catch up and essentially get the last 5 gigatons per year that is needed beyond 2040.
Thanks for sharing that. And Rebecca, you want to continue with that?
Yeah, I think 2030 would be incredible. That's obviously quite ambitious. I mean, based on the targets that we're seeing globally, I would say it's not likely that we would achieve zero emissions by 2030. Everyone seems to be focused on that 2050 goal of net zero emissions at this point. I think it would take, as Pierre said, like incredible changes, shifts in our transportation, in our industry, everything really, to decarbonize all of that. So in less than 10 years, I mean, that would be very incredible, but I don't foresee those huge changes happening in that time. And I think it'll also take big cultural changes too. I know in North America, we have a big consumer problem. So, shifting our mindset to be more aware of those environmental impacts, as you said, and analyzing the supply chain of ourselves even. I think that is really important in order for us to even achieve anywhere near a net zero by 2050 or by 2030.
And maybe to add to that, I mean, I share Pierre's and Rebecca's perspective on this. I think, I mean, even 2050 is a challenging goal. I think obviously, on the other hand, everything that we talked about earlier, I think there's a lot of momentum and drive and a cultural change already happening. But there's a lot more to do. And as Rebecca was saying, I think our own personal habits and consumption is going to be a key part. As we said, I think the regulatory environment will help. But I foresee, for example, where in the future you might have products that just like a food product has discloses the calories and amount of sugar, etc. That companies and products will have to disclose the environmental footprint of their products and operations to that level, and that will help some customers make different choices. But there's a lot of work to do, and at the macro level, the report last year from the International Energy Agency was giving a bit of color or dimension to what that energy transition needs to look like to achieve net zero by 2050. Again, not 2030. And they were specifically on the energy side, they were basically assessing that we would need to stop all new oil and gas projects as of 2021, which didn't happen. And we would need to quadruple wind and solar capacity. And then with some analysis from The Economist made the analogy that would be the equivalent of adding the largest solar park that exists in the world every single day. So every single day we would need to replicate the largest solar park from now until 2030 to be able to be close to the realm of achieving net zero by 2050. So the magnitude of that change is massive. And that's why I think it's a very challenging goal. But I think on the other hand, it tends to be hard for us as human beings to change a habit, but usually at one point it sort of hits us and then we do it, and when it happens, it happens quick. So just like a few years ago, some things would be unthinkable. Today, I think very quickly companies will not be able to maintain their same type of products, and people will not consume the same type of products, and I think that change, once it happens, it will happen quick. And so I am optimistic that in addition with the technologies that Pierre was elaborating, I think we will be able to scale those up eventually, and I think I am optimistic in the longer term, but not for 2030.
Yeah, seems like there's somewhat of a consensus on the year 2030 is unreasonable. But it will be kind of interesting to see, the progression. I know there's a lot of scientists that say, there's kind of a date when there's no turning back. And that's before 2030, as far as I know. So, what will happen for our future will be a big question. I did just do a quick search on Google, and it seems Bhutan and Suriname are the only two countries in the world that are carbon neutral, even carbon negative. So it seems possible for a country to achieve that, but maybe, like Rebecca said earlier, it's something about a mindset of capitalism and kind of changing our behaviors and our actions. So with that in mind, I hope all the viewers consider that. And again, thanks for all the panelists for all the insights you've shared. For the viewers, if you want to connect with all the panelists in the descriptions, you can connect with them on LinkedIn. And again, remember, if you want your rewards point, just add in the comments what you learned or found interesting about this webinar, whether you watched it live or watched the recording later. It doesn't seem like we have any questions from viewers, so I think we'll wrap it up and let you enjoy your evening. Again, thanks for all of you, Rebecca, Andres, and Pierre, for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.